Chapter 3. Pursuit. She pulled the line and zipped onto the next floor. She was in the foyer. Shoes waited in a neat row for their owners, their types and colors representing each member of the family. A coat rack held a number of deflated rain jackets. Afternoon light spilled into the adjacent room through gossamer curtains while empty couches waited for their occupants. A child's doll rested face down on a coffee table next to reading tablets and a toy roll pod. After releasing their grip, the grappling talons relaxed, and the line whipped back into the casing on her forearm. Sabrina turned the bolt in the door, stepped out onto the front steps, and descended into the street. She asked two children where the man who had just come up the stairs had gone. They pointed right. It was hopeless. Among the playing children, evening commuters, market sellers, Orhem was nowhere to be seen. Sabrina had already lost precious time. Orhem had a sizable lead. Sean had no chance to slap a tracking device on him. She looked with growing despair at the long street, crowded with people and broken by dozens of cross streets and alleyways. The ring of green beacons was growing tighter by the moment. Her skin felt hot beneath her suit. He could be anywhere, she thought. Running blindly down the road would be of little use, especially if she passed some point where he had turned off. A child kicked a ball towards the sticks that were set up as a goal in the ongoing game of pitchball. Other children chased after it in long strides. Think, Sabrina. Think. She switched her visor to infrared, turning the people on the street into ghostly blobs of orange surrounded by halos of red. The cobblestone street was a deep purple, almost black. She increased the sensitivity, and the heat the pavement had absorbed from the sun's rays appeared in a soft blue. Another increase of sensitivity, and the imprints from footsteps swelled into view, heat left by the friction of soles on the stones. The children stamped chaotic orange prints around their game. Casual walkers left cooling yellow prints in evenly spaced rows. She studied the mosaic at her feet until she found a faint trail of fading prints, a cooler blue subsiding into indigo, spaced far apart, like those of a runner. She launched herself, dodging and weaving around pedestrians, her velocity boots amplifying her legs' exertions so that her body hurled over more ground between strides. The color of the footsteps was already changing to a greener, warmer hue. On her earpiece, the operator's voice recited ministry guidelines forbidding a cadet to pursue a violent suspect without supervision, but Sean cut in with exaggerated cries of pain. Sabrina's pulse had settled into a steady drumming, but she was not tired. She had trained too much for that. The footsteps turned to the left, and she followed them through an alleyway into the next street. The previous street was reserved for pedestrians, but this one was open to traffic. Cool indigo spheres, civilian roll pods, word passed. Their occupants warm orange blobs, and their fuel cells a hot white beneath their seats. The trail of steps cut through the lanes of traffic and the opposite curb. Sabrina followed, dodging vehicles, ignoring horns. Tires screeched and two roll pods collided. She kept running, following the trail of steps into an alleyway. The footprints were a forest green. In places, they were very close together, as if Orhem had slowed to look over his shoulder. She hurled reclamation bins and broken furniture. The steps turned the corner, ran along the storefronts of the next street before crossing traffic at an angle. She followed, dodging through another gauntlet of commuters heading home. After the next turn, she knew where she was headed. The pavement here was cracked, the streets narrower, and the buildings drab. She was entering the oldest section of the city, the blocks. The apartments were too small, the streets and alleys too narrow, the people insubordinate. She knew the streets and alleys well from many trips to investigate disturbances. The sounds of crying children and a fighting couple drifted down to her from the building above, while she weaved about unreclaimed trash. Around another corner she tripped and crashed onto the ground, her feet caught by a man passed out, his legs stretched out across the gutter. The collision did not even wake him. He was passed out from illegal spirits. His clothes were ragged, and a pungent scent of urine hung over him. She contemplated slapping restraints on him that very moment, so she could come back to pick him up. But her thoughts froze when she saw the words scribbled on the wall behind him. Theopin will set us free. Even in the midst of pursuit, her body hot and streaked with perspiration, the words sent a chill through her. illegal, religious, toxic. She made a note to return and investigate with Sean. Another corner and another street. The blocks, for all their notoriety, were not all too different in their daily rhythms from the newer neighborhoods. On Diagoras Street, one of the wider boulevards, she passed residents on their way home. Children played tag and kicked balls. Street vendors sold vegetables and flat breads from carts. Residents glanced up, startled as she ran past. The footsteps were a bright green now. She was very close. Her quarry had even stopped running. The spacing of his steps told Sabrina that he had slowed to a fast walk. Why had he come here? She asked herself. Was it his home? Did he have friends? If that was the case, she could be in danger. As she turned into the next alleyway, she drew her blaster and depressed the setting to stun. The steps were normally spaced now, passing close to one side of the alley, avoiding the gutter of waste water that ran down the center. She took deep breaths to help her body recover. The steps disappeared around a corner. Instead of following outright, her instincts kept her back. She peered around the building. He was there. Stopped, leaning over, his hands on his knees, gulping air. Before turning the corner, Sabrina scanned the space above. 5 stories of metal balconies loomed overhead, each crowded with fire escape ladders, potted plants, and outdoor furniture. Laundry hung on sagging lines between them. She detected no sinister allies of the man waiting to get the jump on her. She lifted the blaster and stepped out. "Put your hands over your head, Orhem!" she shouted. Surprise and terror mixed on his face. He had nowhere to go. The end of the alleyway was blocked by a wire mesh fence. Sabrina kept the blaster trained on him, waiting for him to cooperate, but his luck had not run out just yet. A gray-haired woman wearing a floral dress and work apron stepped through a doorway into the space between them. She was followed by a girl who could have been her grandchild. Both carried baskets of laundry on their heads and were civilians that could not be stunned without great risk. Orhem sensed his opportunity and raced down the alley. Sabrina cursed, pushing past the startled bystanders. It was too late to fire. The shopkeeper had already scaled the fence at the end of the alleyway and disappeared into the space beyond. Sabrina holstered her weapon and tore off her outer jacket. It was more ornamental than not, and what mattered now was exposing her entire patrol suit. She charged the fence and carried out a series of movements with her hands. Sensors in her gloves recorded the flexing of her fingers, and thousands of microscopic filaments in her suit tensed and spread, tickling her skin as the patrol suit prepared to climb. She pivoted and continued running up the face of the wall, the suit adhering and releasing in time with her motions. The bricks rained flakes down upon her, but the suit held until she neared the ground on the other side of the fence. More flexing of her fingers and the adhesive filaments relaxed. She fell, rolled to disperse her momentum, then resumed pursuit. The desert yawned open around them, red light from the setting sun streaking across the hardpan. The map superimposed on her field of vision showed her own white dot moving outside the circuitry of the city's streets, a solitary star in the blackness of space. Orhem was running eastward into the blazing inferno of the setting sun, the flaps of his jacket snapping in his wake like dark wings. Sabrina followed. Orhem saw her over his shoulder and altered his course toward a hulking structure that Sabrina could not make out in the glare. She increased the filter on the visor and recognized the silhouette to be the barrier surrounding a new ramp of highway still under construction. She threw herself over the temporary walls and started up the empty road that led directly into the fiery sky. Orhem had not broken stride and continued over a rise in the ramp, disappearing down the other side. The sound of traffic was already filling her ears. Over the crest, the road sloped downward. Orhem had stopped where it ended, its paved surface giving way to exposed rebar that waited to be covered in cement. 6 lanes of evening traffic shot across the coast road below. Beyond, the sea waited, dark as ink. Sabrina switched her blaster to her left hand. It was not her firing hand. Stunning him was out of the question while he stood so close to the edge. Instead, she readied her grapple and moved in slow, measured steps. "Mr. Orhem, please. I have no intention to hurt you," she said between deep breaths of air. "Please, step away from the edge. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. She wanted to sound calm, but she could hear the tension in her words. Other voices were clamoring, calling on her earpiece. She ripped it out so that the roar of traffic filled her head from both sides, like the sudden onrush of an ocean wave. Mr. Orham, please. We just came to ask you questions about distilleries. A yellow CRP cut off a blue one on the motorway. The ensuing honk rose and faded, the frequency warbling with the speed. Sabrina moved deliberately, placing her weapon back in her holster in exaggerated movements. See? I don't mean to shoot you, Mr. Orham. He copied her same motions, turning around slowly, but remaining close to the edge. His heels cantilevered just over the lip of the road. He kept his hands away from his body, his palms upwards to the red sky. His chest was rising and falling from exertion. Sweat poured down his face and soaked his shirt. His expression had changed since she caught him unawares in the alleyway. Now he seemed calm. Serene, even. Sabrina thought he might just surrender, until she saw the glint of gold on his chest. In his flight, his shirt had come open, and resting there on his drenched skin in a nest of dark hair was a tiny gold sword. It glinted in the sunlight, and the beam struck Sabrina in the eye like a golden nail. Her body went rigid, and she felt cold, just as she had when she had seen those words written in the alleyway. She swallowed, but could not bring herself to speak. She regretted holstering her blaster. Mr. Orham looked steadily into her eyes, as if he knew exactly what she saw and what she was thinking. Before he stepped backwards, he smiled widely and spoke. "Into your weapons. I send my ghost." He fell backwards, arms outstretched, face upturned to the sky. Sabrina broke out of her shock to shoot the grappling hook at his feet as they tipped over the edge. Her aim was accurate, but just before the talons could reach his leg, they ricocheted off a finger of exposed rebar and arced upwards in an oblique path. When the talons brushed his jacket collar, Sabrina clenched her fist, and the metal prongs clamped down, the sensation of fabric running under her fingers. With a jerking motion, she yanked the slack out of the line and braced herself. The weight was more than she could have ever anticipated. Only her patrol suit kept her arm from being dislocated. Her body slammed down onto the concrete, and her suit made a zipping noise as she was dragged across the road's surface. Panic welled up inside her as she uselessly kicked out her legs. She had just anchored herself to a man trying to kill himself, and physics was on his side. Her body folded around the lip of the unfinished road, her feet dangling over the passing traffic. Servos in the suit vibrated and whined in her armpits and hips as they tried to augment her arm's strength. Her chest felt as if it would break in two as the line holding Orham swung from one arm, and she clung to rebar with the other. Her hand began to slip until the adhesive grip reactivated. She knew the suit could maintain her grip until reinforcements arrived, but she was not sure the talons would hold Orham. His jacket was tented over his head while he swayed, kicking, each movement sending a spasm of pain up through Sabrina. If she had a third arm, she would have stunned him, but instead she had to watch helplessly as he twisted, turned, and slipped out of his jacket. She closed her eyes, but she still heard everything. The abrupt disappearance of his weight was followed by a bang like a heavy sack of sand hitting concrete and popping open. Tires screeched, metal crashed, a suspensor lorry blew its horn. A trailer rolled end over end, glass windscreens popped and shattered. Something huge and metal tumbled. After the commotion came the voices. Voices yelling in the earpiece on her collar. Voices from the roadway below. A woman screamed. Sabrina opened her eyes and turned her face from the chaos below to the horizon, where the setting sun was igniting the sea the color of blood.